Hello everybody, this is going to be my second video. It's basically a video just showing how to create normal particle emitters. I've been getting quite a lot of messages through asking on how to create just normal particles, so I'm going to create a small little video just to hopefully help out with people who are just beginning out, who are just starting out on their journey on this. So I've just got a few textures here. These are just simply decals. I will stick these in the description of the video so that people can follow along with this. I'm just going to try and make something random today. I've not got really a plan, but I'm just going to show how you can do this. I'm also going to show sort of the optimal way to get set up with this, so if you're just brand new, just follow along. So make sure to go into view first, and I know that a lot of people have this enabled. This is sort of like a little viewfinder. This allows you to like jump around the viewport a little. I personally don't really like that, so I'm going to show you how to turn it off. So it's just this option here, so if you just turn off the view selector, that'll get rid of that. Another major thing is make sure you have your Explorer open. So that's that button up here on the top left. So everyone should default like this. This allows you to see everything inside of your workspace, just like your parts and stuff. Another main thing you want to do is you want to click on properties. Now this is a major part. I've seen some people who don't have their properties open. Just make sure that you have this open when you're trying to edit any settings. This is where you have to go to do that. Yeah, so basically this is just some simple parts with decals on and a texture ID for the image on there. These images were most likely created on Photoshop. I've just grabbed them from the toolbox, so they're just free for anyone to use essentially if anything's in the toolbox which is special. So I'm just going to show you the sort of basics on how to get started. So the first thing you want to do is you want to actually create a part. The reason we need a part is because particle emitters can't live inside of themselves, so they have to be a part. They have to be inside of a part basically. So this is how you do it. So what I've just done here is I just click this plus button, head in here, and if you just type or search for particle emitter, it should pop up here. If you can't see it, it should be located in this list. It's quite a long list of stuff, but you've got a whole bunch of stuff in here. We'll cover beams and we'll cover different stuff, but it's in the effects here, so you should see a whole bunch of stuff here. So if you just click on particle emitter, this is what should come up. So the first thing I like to do is I just like to drag the part up into the space just to see what I'm working with. And the first thing I do is I just set this up so that it's viewable and workable in a nice way. So I just want to change the transparency of this part to be invisible. So to do that, you just go to the transparency and the properties of the part and just change this to 1. Now this is just a slider, so it just makes it sort of invisible. So you do that and it makes it see-through. So the next thing you want to do here is, just in case you start playing the game for any reason and you want to run around, just so this part doesn't fall to the floor, what you want to do is you just want to make sure it's anchored. That way it doesn't fall, so that way it will stay in this area. So it'll just stay floating in space. The default texture they give you isn't really great, but it's just to sort of get you started and show that it is working. So if you click on the particle emitter, you will see that there is a bunch of properties. Now you can see that I've got this edit particle and this emit here. These are actually plugins that I have downloaded in order for this to work. So if I head over to manage plugins, you'll see I've got quite a few here. I'll also give a link to the actual particle plugins I've used. The first one is called Particle Emitter Emit. It's from AussiePig. So if I disable that, you see it disappears from the top left hand corner, and if I enable it, it comes back. This will give you a bunch of properties. Basically the best sort of thing to do to start out with is just to change the texture, because this texture is quite bad. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this sort of blob looking texture, head into decal, grab the texture ID, right click, copy, we'll pop over here into the particle emitter and we will just paste. So it's quite a lot, so it looks like smoke at the moment, but that's where we're going to edit this to try and make it look half decent. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm just going to scale this down a little bit so it's a little bit big. This is a really main feature. So some of these settings here has this little 3 dots. If you click on that, it should open up this. So this is like a little graph editor, so you can move each side of it. So it just gives you more control on how the sizing works, because what you can do is you can move this up, move this down, move this up, move this down, and you can see that you start getting some crazy looking effects with these emitters. Now you can delete these, so if you don't like one you can click on one and click delete and get rid of it like that. Or what you can do is you can actually start smoothing them. So the 2 little lines here that you can see, if you start dragging that out, you start to create an envelope, which basically just softens how that looks. But this is clearly not looking anywhere what I want, so I'm just going to scale this down, and I'm actually going to delete this. I'm going to take this and delete that also. I'm just going to make it simple, so it's just going to be one solid line, and all I'm going to do is I'm just going to make the first one about 0.25, and I'm going to make the second one to be 0. What that's doing here is it's making the beginning of the particle when it starts this size, and as it plays it will get smaller and smaller and smaller as it goes. So as you can see, as the higher up they go the higher up they go, the smaller the circle goes. That's normal for this type of animation. Hold on a quick second. Okay, so what we want to do now is we want to start editing the transparency of this. So right now it's heading straight up into the sky and it's just solid, so we'll close this. This will bring us back to our main screen. So we head over to transparency, click on the 3 little dots. What we can do is if we drag this upwards, basically this is changing the transparency of being completely seeable at 0 to invisible at 1. So over the course of this lifetime, you see how they're sort of vanishing away. That's what that does. So let's edit some more settings here. So they're heading quite high up into the sky. The reason they're doing that is because of this setting here called lifetime. This just tells the system how long it's meant to stay alive for. So it's heading all the way up here because it's got quite a large lifetime on it. So if we open this, we can set a minimum or maximum. What I like to do to start with is I just give it a small number like 2. So we'll do that. You'll see that instead of it going straight up into the sky now, it's stopping around here. That's because it's having 2 seconds of life. And the reason it's heading upwards is because we've gave it, we're emitting from the top of the part. So it goes based on the part. So you can see that the top face is heading outwards like so. So if we were to change that, so let's say we go in here and we go to left, it'll start emitting from the left hand face, which is this one here. So you can start to get like a trail like this. Now, now my main goal with this today is basically going to be to create something, you know, unique, possibly like a hit splat or something like that. But yeah, this is just to sort of showcase how you can edit stuff. So if you wanted to make them less, you would just change the rate. So by decreasing that, you're spawning less and less. By increasing them, you're giving out a lot to work with. Now, what you can also do is you can play with the rotation and the rotation speed. Now, this won't really work that well because we're using circle images. So if I change this rotation, you won't actually see anything. But if you're using something else, a different texture, for instance. So if you just change this texture to something else, you will notice a massive difference when you start playing around with the rotation. Another major thing with particle emitters is the orientation. So right now it's facing the camera. What does that mean? So it basically means that if we move this camera, it's always going to be facing towards us, which is great for some animation for particles, but not others. So we want to maybe change this. So if we change this to velocity parallel, you won't actually notice much of a difference. If we change it to perpendicular, you will see that they go sort of flat. Now there's a lot of different uses for these orientations, and it's really just about playing with the settings to get the feel of what you want. Sometimes you won't get exactly what you need, so you do have to maybe seek help or ask for assistance on how to really approach something. But pretty much, it's pretty much just editing settings to get this to work. So if I change the speed of this to, let's say, 0.5, so it's sort of like bubbles or some sort of soap or something. It's really just faking the feeling of what you're looking at. But as you see right now, they're going based on the part's size. So if I scale this part up, whoops, just moved that by accident. If I scale this up by using the tools up here, so move, scale and rotate, you can see that they're sort of all over the square. Now that's normal because it does go based on the part's scale and size. A lot of the time what you will find is you'll have to use an attachment. Now the reason we use attachments are, it's basically, you see the little green circle? It's just an anchor point in the world. So this is sort of just like a place to tell where the particles to go. So if I pop the particles into here, they all go onto that spot. Now this will change how the particle works, but don't panic. What we'll do is we're going to actually just edit this and change some of these settings again to get this working again. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to change this from velocity. In fact, no. What I'll do is I'll decrease the rate to about 20, and I'm actually going to increase the speed of this. So right now they're just sort of sitting in world space. So if I pop this up to about 4, it's maybe a little fast, about 3, and they're a little bit big, so I'm going to go back into the size. We're just going to drag this down a little bit. There we go. So now you can see we've got this nice sort of upward sort of force. Now if I go down into motion and I head to accelerate and give it sort of like a negative value on the y-axis, you'll see that it starts going down the way, which is quite interesting. So I'm going to try and make like a sort of fountain sort of look here. So we've got it going down. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the spread angle. Now this only really works inside of attachments because they're all clustered together like this, and because I have a different orientation enabled. When I start messing with the spread angle on the x and y axis, it starts to sort of push the particles outwards. So if I put like 50 in here, you see how they're all sort of like spraying to the side now? That's because it's giving it an area to work with now, so we're actually giving it more of a chance to move instead of being locked onto the attachment. This can go all the way up to a maximum of 360. But because we're giving it a downward force of 15, it's sort of like spraying out and wanting to go up and out, but it's coming down because we're giving it a motion force, we're giving it acceleration to go downwards. If I put that to 0, you'll see that it starts coming out like this. And you can start to play with the settings. So if I change this to camera up, that's sort of what it looks like. And now if I come back and give this a negative acceleration of about 10, and I start increasing the rate, so let's put this to around 50. sort of like a little fountain effect now, which is quite interesting. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to teach you about the colour. So the colour can be set just by clicking on this box, so you can actually just change the colour to a solid colour of your choice. But if you want to be a little bit more in control of what the colour's doing, you can go back into this graph menu. The colour graph menu is a gradient, so it goes from one colour to another, and you can pop other colours in the middle of this line here. So if we click on this triangle, click on colour, we'll just give it some funky colours to begin with. So if I make it sort of like a bluish tint, this goes from blue to white. So as this plays, it's actually changing from like a solid colour of blue and going to a white. Now you can't really tell what it's doing at the moment, but if I change this to let's say for instance green, and right in the centre we'll add another one by just clicking there, we give it a purple. You can start to see that it changes from blue to purple and then to green. You won't really see the green sadly because it's changing to green roughly about here and it's sort of fading away. So what we'll do is drag this up. There we go. So at the moment you can't really see the particles that well. That's because we don't actually have a light emission enabled. So if we start popping this up, you can start to see it gives a little bit of a glow. And the more transparent you make a texture, so because this is going from 0 all the way up to 1, the glow is only really being affected by the particles right when they spawn. So if you want to change that, start playing with the transparency of these particles. So the higher up you move it, the sort of more invisible they get, the lower down, the more solid colour they become. So if I just drag this all the way across, you can start to see that the particles are surviving a lot longer now. So we'll close that. Let's see what else can we do with this. If we add some squash, I haven't talked about that yet. So squash is a fairly new appearance. This was added recently into Roblox. Basically all it does is it takes the original image, so it takes this image, and it simply just does what it says. It just squashes it down. So what you can do is you can start to play with this, and you can start to get some really weird shapes. This sort of squashes it down, this squashes it up. Sometimes it just doesn't work too well for things like this. It's sort of making it into a line because we're squashing the ball into a sort of line shape, and it looks a little funky. If we were to change this to velocity perpendicular, you can start to get some really strange sort of things. So if I take the acceleration off, it looks yeah, it looks a little strange. We can start playing with the rotation. So you see how it's sort of like going out like that. So if we put it to like 90, starts to go like that. So there's also a minimum and maximum value for a lot of these things. So by changing these, you can actually create some very interesting stuff, very interesting shapes. I'll just pop this back to 0 and we'll take off the squash. So I'm just going to reset that back to what we had it before. And this velocity perpendicular is not looking all that great for this type of effect since we're dealing with spheres, or circles, sorry. So I'm just going to put this back to -15, push them down. And another big update for the particles was the emitter shape. So that actually changes how this is going to behave. So sometimes it can be a little bit confusing. Sometimes they just don't work based on your orientation and size. Now the particle plugins that I've got here actually show some of this. So if I click on edit particle, this is the ROS particle plugin, so I'm going to add that into the description also. What you can see here is you can actually see the sort of lines of where the particle's going, so it's really great to sort of visualize where these particles are heading, so you're not just guessing. And you can actually directly edit the options from within here, so you can actually see our transparency that we had before. It's the exact same as this. but it's just easier than having to go into the particle settings. But you're changing the exact same thing, so you can see that we're changing it from that to that. But it does allow you to do some crazy things in here. You can actually bypass a lot of the limits on what Roblox gives you by default. But this is a more advanced sort of feature set of particles, which I'll be going into probably in a different video, so we'll just come out of that. This is really just to get sort of a basis of how to start editing. So if we start moving the part, you can start to see got a nice little trail going on here. Now the reason it does that is because it's not actually locked onto the part, so it's going to leave a little trail. Some particles are great looking like that, like this sort of gives off a nice feeling whenever you start seeing it like that. You can like imagine that that's sort of maybe a trail for something, or you know, that's maybe something that could work for one of your effects. But say you didn't want it to behave like that, what you would do is you would just simply click on locked to part. What that'll do is it will actually keep the animation and keep it static and rigid like this, so it won't leave anything behind. Now that's really important because I have had to use that quite a few times in the past, so I've had to lock things to the part. Now a big major thing with creating particles is simply going for what you want. So use a reference of some kind. So a lot of people use, you know, anime as a massive reference for a lot of their effects, and a lot of their effects are a mixture of these particle emitters and also scripted logic for that. So I will be going more into I'll be going into more detail and depth with how to do that in a future video. Essentially all it really is using scripts to control these properties as the game plays. So right now we're sort of limited because we can only change them manually at the moment, and we can only preview what's happening as it loops. But if you script this object, you can start to change how it behaves as the game plays. So over the lifetime you can actually start changing this massively inside of a script instead of having to change sliders here. And that's essentially all it really is. A lot of it is to do with, you know, tweening stuff, sizing things up, and stuff like that. So I'm going to showcase this emit plugin first of all. So what we do is we simply disable the particle, and by doing that it's not looping over and over and over like this, so we'll just disable it. The particle still is there, the part's still here, everything remains the same. But if I head over to here, this box is actually showing how many particles that we are going to emit. So right now we have a rate of around 50, so I'm going to sort of copy that. So if I pop in 50 into this box, if I click emit, it's sort of, what it's doing is it's sort of enabling and disabling really fast like this. But emitting particles is actually something that you can do inside of a script. So this tool just simply allows me to emit particles without having to script it first. So it's relatively straightforward to start scripting particles. But if someone isn't used to using the particle emitters, it can get a little bit frustrating. So it's best to use the small amount of plugins like this emit here, which I'll be going into. I'm just going to get the link for you just now. So if we go into Roblox, Aussie particle emitter, yep, that's it there. Okay, so sorry about that. So where was I? So if we start emitting these particles, you can start to see this could be almost be like a hit effect. So if I pop in a block rig, for instance, little R15 model, pop this down here. What we'll do is we'll just position him. We'll rotate him slightly like so. We'll just give him a 90-degree angle so that he's facing straight on. And just for fun, we're just going to delete his face. Bump, there we go. That's sort of how I like to set up my training dummies, and I also like to get rid of the name of the dummy, so I'm just gonna delete that out. Whoops, I'm just gonna set that to none. Okay, and what we're gonna do is we're just gonna click and drag, so I can't actually see my square. There we go. Another good habit to get into is about renaming your particles, so we'll just call this particle 1. We're just gonna move this down. And if you were to think of a script, what the script would do is it would take this particle, it would simply clone it and position it at your player, and then it would emit. So it would emit like that. That's basically all it's doing. It's nothing more complicated than that. It's just a little bit confusing the first time you sort of see this stuff. So if I move this into the sort of center of the body, maybe a little out, if I start emitting, you know, it's not the best effect in the world. It sort of looks like it. If I take off the downward acceleration like this and start emitting upwards like this, sort of like a firework now. You know, so emit. And if we change the lifetime, so if we change this and pop this down to about that, pop this down to about 1 second. So this just basically means that the minimum amount of lifetime that some of these particles can live are going to be 75. So it's going to be 0.75. So basically 3/4 of a second, and the maximum is going to be 1 second. So when I emit, some of them live for a little bit longer than the others, and it just gives it a nice variety of stuff, and you can see how it changes the colours. And if we up this to like 150, start to get really nice looking effects. If we add in some squash into that, so if we like increase the squash a little bit and then emit, you can see it starts doing that. So probably if we do perpendicular, try that gives a different effect. Parallel gives a different effect again. If we do camera facing up, emit, different effect again. Take off the squash, back to the original. So it's really just about playing around with these settings. Now, if I were to, for instance, change this texture, so if I were to pop into decals, grab this texture instead, copy, and paste it into here. Gives it sort of like a nice wave effect, so you can like pop that in here, hit emit, and it's actually not that seeable at the moment. That's simply because this texture is just a small ring. So if we go to decal, pop this in here, and if we change the texture to that one instead, click emit, yeah, you'll start to see that you get this sort of effect. So if we enable this, you can sort of see what we're getting. We'll keep it as the circle for the moment because we haven't really built anything for that, so we'll keep it like this. What we'll do is we'll just start creating, you know, like a sort of like hit effect kind of. So what I'll do is I'll create another part. We'll start from scratch again. So go here, type in particle emitter. We will change this to transparency of around 1. We'll make sure that we can't actually drop it, so we'll change the anchored to true. We'll actually take the can collide off. The reason I do that is because if I'm spawning this part over things like the player, I don't want it to interact or collide with it in any way. So it can create a little bit of a mess if you're in the middle of a game and you spawn some particles at the player's feet or something, and the particle ends up sending the player flying. So just be aware of that. So if we head over here and paste this in, whoops, that's the same texture I had copied. So if I copy, paste that into here, there we go. So So you see how we're getting the sort of same effect as we did before when we first began. So now I'm just going to edit and showcase how I am going to change this. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the lifetime. It's far too high, so if we change that to 1 and 1, just bring that down to a nice manageable level. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the speed to 0, so I'm not going to have it move at all. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually attach an attachment. Pop the particle emitter into the attachment so that it's all spawning at the one place. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the rate, so I'm going to bring this down to about 15. Now, the sort of idea I'm going for here is I'm going to have this sort of like expand outwards. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm actually just going to edit the size a little. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have it start being small first and then coming outwards like so. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the transparency. So as it goes, I'm going to start fading it off like this. Now let's have a little bit of light influence attached to it so we can see it a little better. And I'm just going to change this to camera world up, that way it's always facing upwards on the camera's world space. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to edit the lifetime of this. So you can see it's sort of like a wave, like this. So I'm only going to emit one at a time. And if I start to play with the spread angle, I could probably get some crazy effects here. So if we edit that, and if we change the squash size, let's try that. Yeah, this gives a really good representation of what squash actually does. So you can see it actually just absolutely squashes the texture. So we'll reset that. That's not what I want. Let's have a little look here. What do we want? What do we want? So we want to possibly increase the rate a little. So if we start doing that, sort of like a sonar sort of thing. If I pop that to 1, take the spread angle down. We don't need that. In fact, I'll showcase the spread angle. So if I pop that to that, pop the speed to a really low number, and if I pop that to velocity parallel, you can start to see it sort of starts to spawn randomly. So if I start to increase this rate to around 25, you start getting an effect like that. So you can create a lot of different stuff with that. That's sort of one way to do it. But I'm just going to keep this at 1. I'm going to take the spread angle, pop it to 0. Going to pop that back to camera facing up. That way it's always facing us. So anywhere we go with our camera, it's going to face like that. So if we pop this over the player, and we do that. Okay, let's do that. Whoops, if we do this. Pop that there like that. Just experimenting with the settings as I've just shown. It's a little small, so I'm going to size this up a little. So pop the size up. It's actually opposite what I want, so I want to take it to there, make it go outwards like that. There we go, lovely. And change the transparency of it a little. So we'll start off by creating it to be quite transparent down to being quite viewable. We'll keep it viewable for a long time and we'll start to fade it off like so. That's looking better. We'll keep going. Keep going, keep going. Nice. That looks decent. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the light influence down. Now, I didn't really talk about this. So light influence basically means that it gives the particle a value of how glowy or how much light emission is available. In the past, this setting was the only one you could edit, but if you drag this now down to, let's say, 0, you can start to edit the brightness directly. So I can start to really crank up these numbers to really extreme. So if I put it to like 25, for instance, I can really push it. So I put it to like 100, you can start to get like a nice glow effect on it. We'll change this to, let's say, nice blue. Give it a nice blue, and we'll also use the same practice as before. So we'll start to edit the gradient. So we'll pop this in here. Do that. We'll close that over. Let's start playing with the rotation. That's the sort of rotation speed. If we put negative 140, that might look good. Yeah, it looks pretty decent. So if I disable this real quick, so if I change enable to false and click emit, you can start to see that we start getting some nice hit effects. Let's have a quick look here. So we'll zoom out and we'll grab the particle emitter, emit. Yeah, it looks okay. Let's have a look here. Let's try velocity perpendicular. So that's actually on the floor, like that. So by changing it to velocity perpendicular, it means that you can keep the orientation. It doesn't actually have to follow the camera at all. So what I could do with this is, if I enable this again, I can actually showcase this. So you see how this is sort of like on the floor? You could use this as sort of like something like this, where it pulses out from their feet. And if I copy this, so it's the exact same thing again. If I now rotate this, this should follow the rotation now. So I'll rotate this to be 90 on the z-axis. If I scroll up, pop this in here and put it to like there. Looks a little funny. It's not really a good effect of any kind really, but it's just to sort of showcase what sort of things you can accomplish in such a short time. You know, you just need a couple of pictures, change some settings, mess with some particle emitters, and you can start getting quite nice effects here. So let's say I started to use squash on this, you can start to see it gets pretty funky. So some of the effects might look absolutely rubbish, other ones it may look amazing. It just depends on what you're going for. If we start upping the speed on this, you can see it starts to go out. So it's sort of like a blast effect now, so it's sort of like he's like shouting. So if we up the rate on that, that's what it looks like. So you can see just by changing 2 or 3 different things there, I've went from a hit effect to like a supersonic attack, you know, like he's like shouting, you know, and it's just rotating. It's sort of like a power up effect on the bottom there. But yeah, you can sort of see how this is all sort of playing together. What we'll do is I'm just going to try and make another one. So if we go to particle, make it transparent. We will check this. Pop this in here, decal, texture. Pop in a particle emitter into this. Texture. Pop that in there, you start to see we're getting some nice lines. So we'll pop in an attachment to this as normal, pop this in here so they're all following one line. Whoops, pop it in there, following one line. Next thing I'm going to do is going to change the lifetime to about half a second, roughly. And that looks a little funky, but that's absolutely fine, we'll just keep following that process. Lower this down to about 2. There we go. We won't give it any speed at all. We want it to be completely static. We'll keep it just at one at a time. Let's have a look here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the transparency of it. We might need to mess with this, so do this, maybe this. Make it fade off completely. maybe something like this, so it's solid. There you go. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to squash this, like that. And you can start to see this is sort of like a slash effect now. And if I start to play with the rotation, you see how it's sort of like a slash, which is really cool. So if we put this to a minimum of, say, in fact we'll do a full 360, so we'll do negative 360 and 360. So this looks like a little slash effect that you would get on someone. So if I copy this dummy, pop over here, like so. Yeah, I mean it's okay. It's not the best, but you could edit this still. You can like change the light emission so it's got a glow in the middle. Change the colour of it as normal. So make it nice blue. We'll change the size of it over time. So let's say we give it something like this, so it goes out even more. Bring it down so it's like a nice cut, like that. Transparency might be a little off, so we might need to change that. So we'll start to edit this so it's more visible, a lot more visible, like so. We'll change the lifetime to maybe start to vary that, so we'll give it like that, maybe that. We'll start to increase the rate, so maybe do 5. We'll start doing things like this. Let's have a quick look here. Yeah, seems pretty decent. But yeah, that's pretty much my video on how to create particles. It's a little long, I do understand, but it's just to sort of give everyone the knowledge that they need to progress further. Now, I'll be trying to edit my videos down to about 10-15 minutes from now on. But this one was quite a big video. This is to sort of get everyone sort of introduced to this. Alright, so yeah, take care.